field. Includes nursery management, plant collection, identification and propagation, cactus hybridization, and permaculture design. Since purchasing his first date palm, he's become one of the go-to scholars when it comes to date palms. I can attest to that myself. And identifying varieties of date palms in the valley. With the help of others, he's assisted in increasing both the number and diversity of date palms in collections operated by ASU, U of A, Phoenix Zoo, and USDA. As a reminder, please turn off your cell phones, and our speaker will be answering questions after the presentation. Scott.
Thank you, Jim. Speaking of identifying dates, I don't know what these are. So, if we have any date experts in the audience, feel free to come up after the show, take a look at those, have a taste, and tell me if you have an idea of what they are. The date palm is, its botanical name is Phoenix dactylifera. It is a columnar, erect, woody monocot that will eventually attain a height of about 60 feet, maybe even more. Some palms can get up to 100 feet tall or very close to it. They have 60 to 150 leaves in their crown, and they are anywhere from 10 to 20 feet long, depending on variety and cultural condition. Each leaf persists in the palm for about 3 to 7 years before it eventually dies and dries and hangs on the palm. In this first slide here, you can see that this is an old Monaco date palm. Monaco is a very rare variety from Tunisia. There were only a few of them brought to this country. This is one that exists in Phoenix. It's probably about 40 feet tall, and it's a neglected palm. It's basically an abandoned palm right on Northern Avenue near right around 30th Avenue Northern. Anyway, you can see that it's not pruned, and so its leaves, its old leaves are just kind of hanging there. And they'll hang there until the wind or a palm pruner comes and knocks them off. At the base of each leaf, or at the axil of each leaf, where the leaf joins the trunk of the palm, there is a bud. In its young life, this bud will either be aborted or it will differentiate into an offshoot or a branch, so to speak. As it matures, as the palm becomes sexually mature, that bud will either be aborted or differentiate into a flower cluster or an inflorescence. Okay, and it's from those flower clusters that we get our dates. All right, so you can get offshoots on a mature palm. You know, when it is mature and making flower clusters, every once in a while, one of those buds may go ahead and turn into an offshoot. So you can have palms that will have an offshoot 20 or 30 feet up into the crown. But generally, that's not the rule. The offshoots tend to be they will be your propagation material. Those are the clones. If you have a medjool palm with an offshoot, you cut that offshoot off, you have a medjool palm. A seed-grown medjool is not a medjool. Okay? The inflorescence or the flowers grow at the base of leaves that were grown the previous year, or at the top of the palm. So when the palm flowers, it flowers from the top. And they usually just start pretty small flowering. They don't have to be very big palm before they will start to flower.
The one pops 10, 20 feet up there. Can you still use it and propagate it?
Yes, you can. And we've got a slide later that we show that. Where we show that procedure. Anyway, when the inflorescence first comes out of the crown of the palm, it's in what we call a spathe. That's a sheath-like structure. So it comes out of that palm, out of the top, And well, eventually the flower matures to the point where it actually cracks that spathe. That's called spathe break. At spathe break is when you want to pollinate your palm. And we can carry pollen to the palm. Oops. Why am I going that way? Uh-oh. There we go. There we go. There we go. Okay, well, my slides are a little messed up. I'm sorry about this. Anyway, with offshoots, the point I wanted to make about offshoots is that the offshoots should be taken, if you want production from your palm, you need to cut the offshoots off the palm and either propagate them or throw them away or give them to a friend. If you do not, the palm becomes an impenetrable cluster. This is an example of that right here. This palm is at Manistee Ranch. It's probably about 80 years old or more. It has rarely had an offshoot taken off of it, and it's just one big clump of massive palm tree here. You can see that the other palms, roughly the same age growing next to it, are very tall and columnar because they've had their offshoots taken off. All right, so it will develop into an impenetrable thicket if you don't take those offshoots off. The date palm is also a riparian plant or an oasis plant. It needs permanent to semi-permanent water to really thrive and be productive. It needs long, hot, dry summers. Phoenix is not hot enough and dry enough for some varieties. Now, many varieties do very well here. The Kadrawi, the Medjool, the Black Sphinx, and so forth. The Barhi, we've grown good Barhi here. But the Deglet Noor variety, which is the chief commercial variety, does not necessarily do very well here because our summers are a little too moist and a little too short. Yeah, if you can believe that. Yeah. The Deglet Noor does grow as a landscape plant here, and it's probably the most commonly planted landscape date palm here. I'm going to try. I don't really understand. This is where I am on this slideshow at this point. But this is another example of a tree that was allowed to have offshoots on it. This is an Itima variety that my friend Ron Palmer and I cut some offshoots from. Yeah. Anyway, and that's a four-stemmed palm that was, at least 3 offshoots were allowed to mature on that and form that cluster there. This is another example of a cluster of date palms that the offshoots were cut off. This is in Coachella, California, the Coachella Valley, near the Dead Sea. And this palm actually burned at some point in its life. And a couple of the offshoots have fallen over, become prostrate, and are creeping across the ground.
So those aren't seed dates.
This being worked for fruit. And this is a different picture of the same kind of thing. Okay. The date palm, we believe, it comes from the Middle East or North Africa. It is so intricately woven into human agricultural history for such a long period of time that we're not really sure if there are any wild populations of date palm. But we believe that it originated in the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys, maybe the Nile Valley of Egypt, and the Tigris and Euphrates in current-day Iraq, Babylonia. It is dioecious. That means it is of 2 sexes. The male and the female flower happens to come on different palms. So it's typically a wind-pollinated plant. But if you want good fruit production, traditionally you carry the pollen from the male to the female, and you pollinate the female at spade break. There are seed-grown palms. Generally, if you want a good variety of palm, if you want to be assured of a good variety of palm, you need to have clonal material or an offshoot from a known variety. So if you want a Kadrawi palm, you need an offshoot from a Kadrawi palm. But having said that, the first palms to come to this, date palms to come to this country, came in the form of seed, mostly first through the Spanish missionaries. There are records that Spanish missionaries probably first planted them around the Caribbean and maybe Florida, but there aren't really records that suggest that these things survived for any long period of time. Later, in around 1769, palms were planted in the San Diego, California area by Spanish missionaries. And those palms, some of those palms lived until at least the late 1940s, maybe even later. Now, they didn't necessarily produce good fruit. The climate, even if they did turn into good fruiting varieties, the climate in Southern California along the coast is not conducive to palms because they're date palms because it's too cool. They'll grow there, but the fruit itself won't really function well, won't mature. Several varieties of date have come about through growing seedlings, but that's just more, plant 1,000 seedlings, maybe you get a good variety out of 1,000. And that's a long-term project. If you want to be a commercial grower or a small-time home grower, you need to have no propagation material. The offshoots from elite cultivars of date palm were brought into this country in the late 1800s, 1890s. Small lots of offshoots came to the U.S. It turns out most of those offshoots weren't true to type, so they may have been offshoots of seedlings, and they were very small quantities. A little bit later, right around 1900, 1901, 02, other small importations of offshoots came into the country, mostly into California and Arizona. And those were true to type, but again, they were small quantities of offshoots. And this is, people took a real interest in trying to grow them at that point for a commercial industry. So they were looking for varieties that might work as a commercial product here. Early in the 1900s. Between 1911 and 1922, large commercial importations of offshoots came mostly from Algeria. There were several varieties that were brought to this country. Most of them were degrador, and large shipments were 1,000 or more, 500 or more offshoots at a time, brought into the U.S., mostly into California and Arizona. The industry grew. The degrador became the chief, and still is, the chief commercial variety grown in the United States, and it's grown exclusively in the Coachella Valley of California. The industry in Arizona grew until about the 1940s, and then slowly it tapered off. And there isn't much commercial production in the Phoenix area at all. Now in Yuma, it's actually expanded a little bit. There's more date palms being grown in Yuma on a commercial scale, almost entirely dedicated to the jewel, by the way. But that's been some fairly expansive growth in Yuma County in date palm. This is an old date grove in near Camelback and 44th Street. My friend Ron Palmer took this photograph. These are probably mostly Ikema palms, though I think there are mixed varieties there. And if I'm lucky, yeah, there we go. I wonder if I was just pushing the wrong button the first time. This is the Black Sphinx grove. The Black Sphinx came up. That is a found seedling in the Phoenix area. It is believed to be a seedling of an Egyptian variety called Hyani. The Black Sphinx was determined to be a good variety. It was found around 1919. It was propagated out until there were about 500 palms. and it was grown near, for those of you who are familiar with the Phoenix area, near 46th Street in Lafayette, just south of Camelback and just east of 44th Street. And it is still, to this day, even though it's been subdivided out for housing, it is still harvested to some extent. And this is a picture of, I believe it's Harry Polk, who was the he was the guy that went into this neighborhood in the 70s, long after it had been gone to housing, and made deals with all the homeowners that he would harvest the fruit from their palms. And he would, sometimes he'd give them a little money, or he'd give them a few dates, and then he'd sell the rest.
Does he manually pollinate them, or do they
Yeah.
just get wind?
No, you don't leave it up to wind if you really want good food. And then this is Manistee Ranch right here. This is in Glendale, Arizona, around 51st Avenue and Northern. This is about a 2 or 3 acre patch of dates. It's actually managed as a park now by the city of Glendale, and the house is actually managed by the Historical Society, the Glendale Historical Society. These palms are probably about 80 years old or more, and it's of mixed varieties. We've identified a few varieties in this bunch of palms, but turns out there are probably more varieties than I originally thought there were, and we haven't been able to identify all of them. So, we use Arabic terms to describe the stages of ripeness in a date. Those terms are Kimri, Kalal, Rutab, and Tamar. The Kimri date is the first date. Once it's pollinated, you get something that starts off smaller than a pea. It's hard and green, and it continues to grows pretty rapidly up until it gets to its eventual full size. That hard green phase of rapid growth is called the Kimri stage. K-I-R-M-I, or K-I-M-R-I, Kimri. Nobody really eats dates at that phase. Then there is the Kalal phase. The Kalal phase is when the date reaches full size and it develops a characteristic color. That color will either be red or yellow, or a combination of the two. So you'll see red dates hanging in some palms and yellow dates hanging in other palms. They're all date palms. At this point, they're full size, they're full moisture, and this is also when you want to put bags on your clusters of dates, because when they start to get color, that's when the birds come along and start doing their test pecks. All right, so you'll start to develop little holes, and you'll see dates kind of half disappear, even though they're not ready to eat yet. The birds are checking them out. So that's when you want to put the bags on. Then there's the Rutab stage. When this date starts to soften from the tip back, that's called the Rutab stage. The Rutab stage is when most Europeans, most Americans like to eat the date. The Kalal stage, some varieties can be eaten in the Kalal stage, like the Barhi variety, for instance. And there is a growing market for that in this country, but most people that I've spoken to like the Rutab stage of date. It's soft and gooey. And it's very sweet. Hard to handle on the soft varieties, but it's good. And then there's the Tamar stage. If you allow the date to hang on the palm, or you can do this artificially by cutting the cluster and hanging it in a shed away from the birds, but allowing the date to hang on the palm for an extended period of time into the fall and late summer and fall, as that Rutab date continues to dry down, once it gets to about 2/3 to 3/4 of its original moisture content, that's called the Tamar stage of date. The Tamar stage is the least perishable of all the stages that I mentioned. The Rutab stage if you pick rhubarb dates, and especially if they're the soft varieties, you probably want to get them into the refrigerator pretty quickly. Tamar dates, most varieties, you can keep them for months or even years at room temperature, and they won't degrade much over that period of time, depending on the variety, of course. Okay, so there's some Kimberley dates up in this palm. This palm was just recently pollinated. So these are, these are little more than flowers at this time. You can see them kind of hanging loosely in the crown of the palm. Yeah, we're back on schedule now. This is a yellow kalal date. Here's some yellow kalal dates that are starting to rhubarb. You'll see some of these dates in here are starting to kind of brown and soften up. So that's a mix of kalal and rhubarb dates right there. Here's a red kalal. Red kalal, and again, these are probably about, I don't know, they're partially kalal and partially rhubarb. The ones that are starting to turn sort of a blackish color are starting to turn rhubarb. In other words, they're starting to lose their moisture and soften up a little bit. Okay, this is a mix. This is sort of a yellow date with a brushing of red over it. So in the distance, it looks kind of orangish or pinkish. And here's a cluster of those here. And then more red ones. That's sort of mostly kalal, some rhubarb. Mostly rhubarb, some kalal. And then this one, I threw this picture in just because these are striking. The owner of this palm is the man in the center here with the big hat on. And he had a bunch of unknown varieties growing around his place. These are red tamar or kalal dates, but they're so deep red they're almost purple. And it was quite striking, especially when contrasted with the fruit stems that were the yellow gold fruit stems that were holding them up there. Okay, in addition, in this country we divide dates up into 3 varieties. We divide them up into soft, semi-soft or semi-dry, and dry dates. Sometimes we call dry dates red dates. The soft varieties are the ones that we grow most often commercially, and the semi-dry, well, let me back up here. The soft dates tend to be really high moisture in the rhubarb stage. The semi-dry, just slightly less moisture in the rhubarb stage. And then the dry or red dates, very little moisture in the rhubarb stage, and by the time they get to the tamar stage, they can be as hard as a rock. Those are the ones, the red dates, the dry dates, that really don't decay or degrade at all over a period of time if they're kept at room temperature. Those were the Bedouin dates that were carried across the deserts in goatskin bags and for months and did not degrade in quality. We generally like the softer dates here in this group. At spade break, you want to pollinate your, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Dates, cultivation and production. Dates will take a wide range of soil types. They prefer a deep sandy loam. They tend to grow along river valleys where you might have a deep sandy loam. They can grow in dense rocky soil, but they do not prefer that kind of soil. The Basra region in Iraq, which is one of the date growing capitals of the world, has a very hard clay soil, and dates do very well there with great amount of water. But dry or deep sandy soil, deep sandy loam is the preferred soil. They require copious amounts of water, especially during the early phases of production. You want to keep the soil moist in the early summer, spring and early summer when your dates are first forming. You want lots of water to keep the soil moist. That's for good fruit production. They are a drought-tolerant plant once they're established, but they will not necessarily produce good fruit under drought-type conditions. Most varieties won't. And they also need space for good air space and good air circulation around the crown of the palm. One of the enemies of good dates is humidity around the clusters of fruit. And high humidity during our monsoon season has caused problems with commercial production in the past. So you need good air circulation around the crown. At spade break, which is usually going to be in the spring, can be late winter, but anywhere from February through April, you can expect to see the flowers starting to open on the date palms. The first thing you want to do is go collect your pollen. This is a male date palm right here, and you can see the spades are the dark brown material that the flower clusters are sort of sticking out of. These are some old spades from last year, and these are some old male flower clusters from last year. I've got a sample of that in the back. But this is your pollen here. The pollen is actually like flour or talcum powder. Once you want to collect your male pollen before it even gets to this stage, you want to collect it right at spade break, maybe even a day or two before, because once they pop out, the bees are going to get it. And the bees will take the pollen and they don't give it to the female palm, they take it to the hive. So your pollen disappears quickly. The European honeybee will fly off with your pollen. So you collect your male pollen, you dry it out, and you store it until the females are reaching spade break. That might be the next day, or it might be several days or even a month later. You can store this by hanging the male flower cluster upside down over a sheet of newspaper or something in cool, dry, well-ventilated room, no wind though, out of the sun, and the pollen just dehisces or precipitates out of the flower cluster. You can then scoop that pollen up, and you can put it in a squirt mustard bottle or a glass jar and stick it in the refrigerator. And just wait for your females to bloom. Okay? Then when the female does bloom and you need to apply the pollen to the female flowers, all you need to do is get cotton. There are many ways to deliver the pollen to the female. You can dab a cotton ball in it and dust it onto the females and stick a piece of the cotton ball in each female flower cluster. You can squirt it on with a mustard bottle. There are all sorts of blowers and gizmos and things that have been developed over the years to deliver pollen to the female palm. You can also just take a few strands of a male flower and stick it into, dust it on, and then stick it into the female flower cluster and tie it with a little loose loop of kite string, or slip a wine bottle bag over it. That will help keep the flower cluster together as it starts to mature, and will also help keep the pollen up close to the female flowers. Once pollination has occurred, the fruit cluster continues to grow, and it extends further and further out of the palm until it gets to about the collal stage. It will continue to inch its way out of that palm. As it's doing that, you want to go up and guide that thing through the leaves and the other fruit clusters, so that they don't all get tangled up. Because once you start to form larger dates, if you've got your fruit clusters all tangled up with each other and tangled up with the leaves of the palm, then it's a real mess trying to pull those things apart. They're heavy, they're awkward, they're hung up on each other and everything around them, and they'll pop apart when you start, when you try to pull them apart. So if you can guide them through, go up every once in a while, and while they're still fairly together and fairly small, continue to coax them through the leaves of the palm. That's very helpful. Then once they get to fully extended, you want to tie them down, and that's what this slide is showing right here. That is actually tied to a leaf. So the fruit stem is actually tied to the leaf right there. That's to help support the cluster so that when the wind blows and when the cluster gets heavier and heavier as it takes on more moisture, it doesn't just snap. And it usually breaks, but not always. This is a better photograph of the same thing right here. Okay. Then again, once they're at collal stage, you want to bag the dates. There are several kinds of bags. This is in the Coachella Valley, and these are kind of a cotton gauze type of a bag. Kind of thin, sheer material. Important that it dries out quickly if it gets wet. Though it, from what I understand, it never rains in the Coachella Valley. Though I've seen it rain in the Coachella Valley. That's just a little closer view of the same type of bag. You can actually see the dates through it. And it makes me wonder why the birds don't see through that and peck holes in it anyway. But
They do.
it seems to work for them. But the jewel growers in Yuma County and across the river in Bard, California, and the Imperial County use these bags pretty extensively too. This is a little bit more difficult to see, but these are sort of a nylon mesh bags made out of like shade cloth material. We can buy those locally at a place called Arizona Bag Company. And it's a nylon mesh. It will last for several years. Again, good air circulation through them. And they do a pretty good job of keeping the birds off. And then some people, and I've just tried this year, will wrap craft paper around, or like big rolls of craft paper and wrap it around the dates. I've tried it because I have problems with rats getting into my dates. I have some small trees, and we've got roof rats at the Phoenix Zoo, running around getting into my dates in the middle of the night. So I put craft paper around my already bagged dates with the idea that when the rats came down the fruit stem, they'd get on that craft paper and slip off and fall on the ground, and it seems to have worked. What's interesting about this photo is that you can see on the far side over there that there are some yellow collal dates hanging out. But this is probably a Barhi variety. There are some yellow, fairly good-sized collal dates hanging out from underneath that one bag. And yet this uncovered cluster in the middle is green and looks Kimri, still in the Kimri stage. Well, the story is that cluster, the fruit stem has a kink in it. It actually broke or kinked. And so that stopped those dates from going ahead and maturing normally. So that's probably a lost bunch of dates right there. That's okay. That palm will go ahead and make 150 or 200 pounds of dates anyway. So that's something I should touch on here. A light-producing date at full production is going to make 100 to 125 pounds of dates. A heavy producer can easily make 300 to 350 pounds of dates. So one date palm in your backyard of the correct variety will keep you and your neighbors in dates forever. And then, yes, that palm was probably trunk feet. Probably a little taller than me, maybe 7, 8 feet. I'd say, I'd say maybe 7 or 8 feet.
How old do you think it is?
Oh, I don't know. It's not old.
Not that old.
Well, a decade and a half.
Okay.
That's in the Coachella Valley, where the soil and the climate is just really good for dates. That has been deemed to be the best date producing area in the country. Okay. Then at the end of the summer, after all summer of taking care of your dates, you get to harvest them, and you can harvest in the collal. Certain varieties you can harvest them in the collal when they're hard and crunchy, and eat them. They're a little bit astringent, a little bit sweet. The Barhi is a really good variety to harvest in the collal stage. Other varieties you might be able to try in the collal stage are the Colosso, the Malawi, the Hyani, the Samani, which is really hard to find, and the Zagul, which is even harder to find. And there are others. I knew a guy that liked the jewels in the collal stage. I can't handle it. There's an old variety called Brain, B-R-A-I-M. that was grown in the Phoenix area, and you can evidently eat that in the Kalal stage too. We tried some at the ASU collection one time, and they were pretty good.
Those things on the foot of the table are there for the ants not to cry?
For the ants, yes. Okay, so what this is that this is a small commercial grower, has about 5 acres of dates in the Coachella Valley. And he has harvested in the Kalal and the Rutab stage with the idea that he's going to sell in the either Rutab or Tamar, or a lot of these, not all of these. He will sell them in the Rutab or the Tamar stage. So he started pulling some of his dates out of the palm. And he's got them in well-ventilated, slatted, perforated trays, plastic trays. He's got an oscillating fan blowing on him, and he's on a screened porch in a hot climate. So these are drying down. Again, good air circulation is always key. And yes, these are little cups of oil to keep the ants from plucking the table eggs. Okay, another picture of the same operation. The red ones in the front are the black sphinx. This is one of the few growers in California that has a black sphinx palm. So they did make it over there. And then the other ones, I believe, are one that he will sell in the Kalal or the Rutab called Mariana. It's believed to be a seedling of the Halawi variety. And again, more of the same. And this is what Kalal dates would look like if you were to buy them. They'd be on the strand. All right, that's how you harvest Kalal dates. You actually cut the individual strands of dates off when they're in the late Kalal days. These are fairly perishable. They'll either hurry up and ripen on you, or sometimes they'll kind of shrivel up and turn into nothing. So the Kalal, if you're eating Kalal dates, you need to keep them refrigerated if you're going to have to store them, and you need to eat them pretty quickly. And this is a larger commercial operation. This guy is in Yuma County. It's a place called Martha's Gardens, I believe. Martha's Gardens. Plural. Martha's Date Garden. Dedicated mostly to the medjool. He does have a small interest in other varieties, but he's got acres and acres of medjool. And this is his big new sorting and packing shed here. And you can see these dates here they're all medjools, what we're looking at here. And the yellow ones are just about ready to go from the Kalal to the Tamar stage, or from the Kalal to the Rutab stage. They're just starting to go into the Rutab stage. Again, the same types of trays, good air circulation. These are now Rutab, mostly Rutab, and they're just soft and gooey. These are still difficult to pack and ship. Okay. And then these, well, that just shows how you can stack the trays. And then these right here are, they're dried down a bit. They're not to the Tamar stage yet. They're not real hard and chewy, but they are dried down so that they are a packable, shippable thing, product. Going through that. Okay, so offshoot propagation and tools used for offshoot propagation. We've got about 10 more minutes. You interested in propagation, or do you want to just go straight to the questions and answers? Okay. Because I don't take pictures of my own tools, I had to rely upon a friend to send me pictures of his. These are Ron Palmer's tools, and he's sitting in the front, by the way. And this is how heavy is your hammer? It's 2 heavy. So it's more than 5. Is it 10 pound?
Yes, it is.
10 pound? Okay. Heavy hammer. This is the chisel. That is a date cutting knife, or a pruning knife.
It's a homemade one.
Homemade one, made out of a circular saw blade, is it? Okay. Cuts them pretty well. Just kind of put it on the front and pull it back. This is a heavy shovel. that had the old wood handle taken off of it and a metal handle put on it, so you can cut date roots real easy with it. And then there's the sharpshooter up there. And we've got a little bit different picture of the same tools. You'll notice that the chisel, and I believe the chisel was made out of an old tractor or bulldozer part. This is sort of an heirloom chisel that was handed down from one date grower to another. Bill's. You'll notice that it's kind of rounded on the top side here. That's a very beneficial thing to have. It's also got a beveled edge. It's flat on one side and it has a beveled edge on the other side. We can show a little bit better picture of that. See, this is the sharp cutting edge right here, all the way around on 3 sides. This is the sharp cutting edge. And this is the domed top surface, and then the bottom surface is flat with no beveled edge. That's the bottom surface. And this shows that it's actually kind of a domed shape. The reason that's important is because you drive this into the area where the offshoot is connected to the mother palm trunk. Once you use a big hammer to do that. And palm trees are made out of something very similar to very tough growth. Once you get that chisel in there, if it's flat like my chisel is, it gets wedged in there and you spend a lot of time doing this trying to get your chisel back. And that's where you lose a lot of energy and decide to quit growing dates altogether. When you have a little bit of a rounded dome top to the chisel, that actually comes out a little bit easier. It doesn't just pop out like a watermelon seed, but it's a lot easier to retrieve your chisel once it's rounded on top. This is just something that I was very interested in. This is Vince Salmons at the USDA date germplasm repository in the Coachella Valley in California. He's made an air hammer, jackhammer operated type of, runs off of an air compressor. So you can see the hose, the red hose coming up behind it. That whole thing weighs 90 pounds. So the hard work there is just carrying it to the palm. And it hooks up to a gas-powered air compressor in the back of his pickup truck. But once he gets it on the palm where he needs to make the cut, he can just kind of stand there and guide it with one hand while it pounds away with a T-post driver on the top of the chisel handle. And I've seen that work. It's really easy. And of course, you should always wear a hat in the sun. This is a date knife, another date palm pruning knife. Basically, it's a curved machete. Probably, I don't know, 15 to 18-inch blade. The gauntlet, or that leather pouch contains the handle. You stick your hand in there. That protects you from the spines when you're chopping away at a palm that's got spines at the base of its leaves that are that long. Okay, this is date offshoot cutting operation here. First thing we like to do is cut all the leaves off of the offshoot. You leave the leaves on the offshoot until you're ready to take the offshoot. Then you cut all the leaves off except for maybe the top half dozen to dozen. Then we like to tie them up really tight. Really tight. And then, and there's some disagreement among date experts as to whether you need to do this or not, but I like to cut all this fluffy leafy material off somewhere right above the tie. My reasoning is that this thing is going to be severed from the mom and is going to have to generate basically a brand new root system. We do this in the summertime. In the late spring through the summer is when we take offshoots. It's hot in the summer. If this thing transpires faster and loses moisture faster than it can make up new roots, it might just dry away and die. So I like to cut the most transpirable material off of the palm. Some people don't and have good success, and some people don't and have bad success or no success. So there it is cut, and you find somebody standing around and give them a shovel. And it helps if you have more than one person digging. You dig around the base. Now, I'd like to point out, this was a great big offshoot, and in fact, this offshoot ended up just west of this building. So it's in a planter bed just outside of this building along the wall. If you can get a plug of soil this big on the base of an offshoot, that's a good thing. But more likely than not, that's going to be way too hard to manage, especially if you're not using machines to lift it. This was eventually lifted out of the hole with a machine. So if all that soil falls off, or most of that soil falls off, and you end up with a bare root offshoot, that's just fine. As long as you take good care of it, don't let it dry out too much, it should survive that. This is probably one of my photos. It's doesn't really show as well. This is that chisel being used, but you can't really see the chisel. He's got his hand on it, and he's jamming it back into the joint of where the offshoot meets the mother palm. These are actually established offshoots, but this is kind of what you end up with when you cut an offshoot. You have something with very little root, usually. Sometimes they'll have a lot of root, but usually you have just a little bit of root and kind of a puny looking little palm. These are some offshoots that were planted at the Coachella Valley Agricultural Research Station, the USDA planting. Their mature plantings are in the background there, just beyond the little row of citrus trees. These are some that my friend Ron and I took to California, and they're being planted right now. So this is what your offshoots look like once they're taken. They don't look like much. They don't resemble a palm tree very much at all. They're just a little bulb with a stick coming out of the top of them. This is what happens when an offshoot starts to grow. This is where the palm was headed back, right here, where the fingertip is. So all this green material that's above the hand was pushed up from within the crown of the palm. So this is a sign that this palm is growing. That's what you want to see. And you can see in the background, there are a lot of palms that are just starting to sprout. Sprout leaves. Okay. High offshoots. Somebody asked about high offshoots. This is a high offshoot of the Badria variety. This is the only one anybody knows about that has, of this variety, that had any offshoots at all. So there were two offshoots, both of them high on the trunk of the palm. We had a bubbler system at the bottom of this palm. This is in the ASU collection in the East Campus. We had a bubbler system at the bottom, so we fashioned up a little T with a poly grip line that ran up and wrapped around the base of this offshoot. We've got a different photograph of that. So that this offshoot will get water. You can see there's an emitter up there. There were probably about 3 or 4 emitters that dripped down on the top of the base of this shoot and watered it around the base, so that the adventitious roots that were kind of growing and drying and growing and drying could get a drink of water every time the water came on, one to several times a week.
You cut that off, the offshoots get this big.
Huh?
Why can't you just harvest offshoots if it's the appropriate time?
There's some
small.
There's something called the root initiation zone on an offshoot, and you can take offshoots that are small, but they have to have a well-developed root initiation zone. Okay. Well, I like to take offshoots when they're about 15. They would fit into a 15-gallon or 24-inch box, 15-gallon pot or a 24-inch box. Taking great big offshoots is not necessarily advantageous. But taking really small offshoots, you very often end up with dead stuff. Though, lots of small offshoots will survive. Okay. This is the dry after we harvested it. After we we gave it to the USDA, It's growing like crazy right now. So, and as you can see at the base, its offshoots are starting to grow. So it's got, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 offshoots coming on. So this variety is safe for now, as long as that palm tree doesn't get knocked off. Okay, this is when I harvested a piece of my finger too. This is a new planting of offshoots at the research station in California, USDA. Same 2 rows of offshoots, I think a year later. That's a Monocker. That first slide of a Monocker palm, this is an offshoot of a Monocker palm at USDA. Again, that's a pretty hard to find variety. This is an Itima 2 years after it was cut. We took Itima, they didn't have any Itima palms. It's an Algerian date palm. It was grown in Phoenix quite extensively, a little bit in California. Well, the USDA no longer had any Itima palms, so we found some in Arizona and took 2 offshoots to the USDA in California. One of them died almost immediately. The other one went crazy. And it was planted as a little stick, and 2 years later it was doing this. So we were happy campers about that. That just depicts that unknown round turned out to be the variety Palali. These are the jewel palms, the young jewel grove in sort of central Yuma County, around Baker Peaks. Those are the Baker Peaks in the background. This is just hot sandy desert, and they're doing fine on a drip system. They get water. They get a lot of water from the drip system, but they're doing fine out there. This is, I think this is the Yuma County Grove. Do you remember without state? Is that Baker Peaks too?
I think this is the new plant.
Oh, Daytime, okay. So that's in Yuma County too. And then this is the Bard Valley. They have a little better soil there. They also have a water table that's like 3 to 6 feet under the ground, moving. So they have really, the valley is dedicated almost entirely to the jewel variety. That is just a photograph of the Sayer, S-A-Y-E-R palm, not far from where I live in Phoenix. That's in an old grove. It gets an especially attractive crown, sort of compressed, compact crown. And a pretty good date. I had a couple of them already. And this is the end of the show. So, any questions? Still got about 8 minutes.
In the first stage, the culinary stage, I, not knowing anything about date palms, I see palms that have small little nubbins up there, painted on the cluster. Are those going to become dates? I mean,
Are they on date palms?
well,
Date palm has a pinnate leaf.
okay, I'm not sure. Other palms fruit the same way, except they're just small little fruits that I'm not used to press.
The Canary Island date palm will make little dates that you can eat. They're edible. I don't consider them eatable. Some people like them. I would consider, when compared to a Phoenix dactylifera, Canary Island is Phoenix canariensis. It's a single stem. Some people call them pineapple palms because they get fat trunks, and in their young life they look like pineapples. And they're related to the date palm, the edible date palm. They make an okay fruit, but it's really not all that much. It's small, mostly seed. Whereas Phoenix dactylifera, the edible date palm, tends to be a multi-stem plant, taller, thinner, and can make, if you have a good cultivar, can make an excellent quality fruit. Sometimes males will try to make a fruit, and you'll see these weird little date-like structures hanging in a male palm, and they never really go anywhere. They don't do anything. They don't ripen right. They're not real dates. They're just sort of odd little adventitious parts.
We were in some hotel one time in Palm Desert. Not Palm Desert, desert something. And right in front of the hotel, there was a palm tree, Noor, they knew?
Degler.
Noor. Degler Noor.
Yeah.
They were the same size as the regular, and the owner says, they are no good, why? They have been pollinated.
Right.
And I go there and I pick lots of them. They are not as sweet as the pollinated one, but they don't have seeds.
Right. Yeah, and that's, every once in a while you hear about somebody that discovered a seedless date. It's an unpollinated date. And that's true, they can get to be full size. And there is one grower in California that there's a variety called Dairy. In fact, it's on that, I have this photograph in the back too. Dairy, that he will sell the unpollinated fruit.
With seed? With seed?
No, unpollinated, with no seed. But it's, when compared to the dairy that's been pollinated, it's,
It's not as sweet,
I don't like it.
but still is good.
The difference between edible and eatable.
See, I compare that to eggs. And the chicken lays eggs anyhow.
Right.
If it's pollinated or not, the chicks won't come out.
Yes?
You will have to take both male and female offshoots, I presume some ratio, to produce.
Good question.
pollinated
Good
dates.
question. One male will pollinate up to 50 females. Little pollen goes a long way.
If you plant two offshoots of approximately the same size, a male and a female, will they blossom at different ages? That is, will one or the other bloom earlier?
They almost never bloom in sync, and that's why you store pollen. Very often your males will bloom first. No, the females are right behind them. It's not, you don't have to wait 6 months. But if you take two offshoots of the same size and plant them, they won't necessarily start blooming in the same year. They have to go through their shock period and mature, and then once they get to sexual maturity, that might be earlier for the female than it is for the male. I don't know.
That's what, because sometimes you'll see some fruit, the male will, whether have both male and female, you see the male will start to produce sometimes a year or two ahead of when the female begins to produce.
That may be. And even in the blooming season, if they're both blooming palms at that point, it doesn't mean they're going to bloom in sync.
Yeah.
My Sphinx palm that I have on the west side of town starts blooming when the male that's right next to it has been blooming for weeks, sometimes a month or more. But there's enough pollen blowing around in the wind, and I carry pollen to her anyway, that she gets pollen.
Will any other palms, for instance, there are a lot of Washingtonias around, will any of that pollen?
Phoenix. Other Phoenix will pollinate, Phoenix dactylifer, Phoenix canariensis will, but then again, are they blooming at the same time? So you might as well just locate a male palm somewhere and go collect pollen. You don't need a male palm to produce dates. You need pollen to produce dates. Okay, so if your neighbor's got a male palm with offshoots on it, you can go cut off some small flower clusters from those offshoots and pollinate them. Yes?
I'm always concerned on offshoots. Like the picture that you showed, I would be shocked if I did that to, somebody's tree that wasn't mine. They'd be like, "You're nuts." That the size of that hole, I was really shocked. How much damage can you do, or how much working around that, or how little do you need to do before you start damaging the main top?
I've made some really bad cuts on date palms and put really ugly scars where I actually cut a chunk of the mother out.
Yeah.
She didn't care.
Didn't say anything.
These things are designed to combat the megafauna. Okay, that's why they have the spines this long at the base of each leaf, so a pachyderm can't rip its leaves out. All right, they're used to being beat up. Now that doesn't mean you want to do it, and if you love your date palms, you try not to do that. But I've because I was getting beat up by the palm tree. I got so tired that I was making bad cuts, and it didn't make that much difference.
We know how the male is ready. How would you know when the female is ready to accept the
Stage break.
Huh?
That's stage break.
They
As soon
won't-
as the stage breaks, you get your pollen on the female. We can do one more question. Yes?
Have you ever, do I take an offshoot, have you ever used a chainsaw? Where you have to cut through it?
Yeah, and it hasn't worked well. I've known people that have tried to use chainsaw. Now, I will sometimes, I have, use a chainsaw to get into the area where I need to make my cut with the chisel. That's okay. But I've known people that have used chainsaws and it doesn't work well. And I don't know why. Thank you. Anybody identify these?